Warning, we do not spit heretics were harder than making in this video. Loyal subjects of the Imperium are required to watch this material. Failure to do so will be interpreted as heresy and will be charged in accordance with the last imperius. You have been advised.
Do you hate orcs? No, really. I mean, do you really hate orcs? How about heretics and traitors? Do you hate them? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then I had the perfect game for you. If you said no, please report yourself to the nearest Arbitus for reconditioning. Today, I wanted to take a look at the original Space Marine. Now, I know Space Marine 2 is around the corner and should be out by the next week when this video goes live, but because of that, I wanted to take a look at the original Space Marine to see how it held up. I mean, honestly, I can already tell you I love this game. I've been playing it ever since it came out, and I go back and play it every so often just because it's one of the only Warhammer games that will give you this kind of experience. So I am looking forward to Space Marine 2, but of course we don't know how that's going to turn out, and I'm waiting to see how the reviews come in. Just as a warning, I will be spoiling the game. I'm going to be going over the entire story and looking at the gameplay as a whole, so if you're concerned about any kind of spoilers for the first game, you may want to click off the video. So to begin, Relic Entertainment developed Warhammer 40k Space Marine, and it is the last game that they made in the Warhammer franchise before they moved on to other things.
Wait, sir, what are you talking about? You're forgetting about Dawn of War 3.
No, Guardsman, I'm afraid you're mistaken. Dawn of War 3, it does not exist.
But sir, it says right here on the Wikipedia page, Dawn of War 3.
Guardsman, Wikipedia is not approved Imperial reading material. Where did you get that?
Well, you see, sir, I found this relic here.
Nope. I'm gonna stop you right there, Guardsman. I need to get this video done, and you need to get rid of that, because you are gonna get us in a lot of trouble, okay? Anyway, sorry about that. So Space Marine was released in 2011 by Relic Entertainment for the Windows, PS3, and Xbox 360. Now, I do have a Xbox 360 copy of it, but PC is the best way to play, despite the fact I still had to download a fix to get the game to not crash on startup for PC. However, given there's no remaster or report to any modern day console, even though I think that's kind of a shame, especially considering Space Marine 2 is about to come out, I think it would be great to port the original over so people can have a chance to play it. But I digress, so let's get into the actual game. Space Marine immediately starts off with one of the best action set pieces that I've ever seen. In fact, action games around this time were just dropping banger after banger of action set piece. I'm thinking of like Dante versus Nero in DMC 4, the opening sequence to Saints Row 3 where you're flying down from a plane, or even when you descend from the helicopter on top of the apartment buildings. Oh, and who can forget God of War 3's opening sequence? I can go on and on about how action games of this time period were just built different. I mean, they just really went over the top of most of these games no matter what they were with these action set pieces, and I'm gonna tell you, Space Marine is just one after another of action set piece. So the premise of Space Marine is that a forge world is being invaded by orcs, and they don't have much of an option but to send someone in to try to defend it because there's a Titan on the world. So they send in the Ultramarines to protect the Titan from capture by the orcs. Meet the character you're gonna be playing, Captain Titus and his gang. You got Sidonis, the grizzled war veteran badass. You got green behind the ears, stick in the mud, codex thumping, Leandros. So the game starts off with Captain Titus and his men trying to make it planetside, but they can't get through because of an orc blockade. As a result, their ship nearly gets shot down by the orc ships. So Captain Titus, to Leandros' dismay, orders him to put on jetpacks, tells his pilot to get the hell out of there. They jump from their shuttle, dodging enemy fire in mid-air as they land on the orc ships using their jump packs. Captain Titus lands on the orc ship and proceeds to go rip and tear mode with nothing more than a combat knife and a hand bolter. He then proceeds to destroy the orc ship with its own guns, causing it to crash into the surface of the planet, and that was his way of getting on the planet's surface. I am telling you right now, this is some serious, you can't just blast a hole into the surface of Mars energy right here. There is simply no limit to what Captain Titus is willing to do to make a statement to the enemies of the Imperium of Man. Now, after another happy landing, Titus makes his way to meet up with the rest of his squad mates who are spread out. Now this is where you come across the game's first weapon, the iconic bolter. The bolter is a mainstay weapon that you'll keep at all times, and the bolter is actually quite good even throughout the end of the game, as it does get an upgrade midway through. The bolter feels absolutely phenomenal to shoot. It's got a heavy, gritty feel to it, something you would expect when it comes to the Space Marine bolter, but also enemies' heads and body parts explode when shot with it. It's a great weapon and it feels great to shoot, and I feel like it's a very accurate version of the bolter. After getting in some target practice with your bolter, you're going to meet up with Leandros and find out that the guardsmen on the planet are still alive, and you're going to rendezvous with Sidonis and meet up with the guardsmen to figure out what's really going on the planet side. You find out that a lieutenant is the only remaining commanding officer left on the planet who is currently leading the guards' defense against the orcs. With chainsword in hand, and one massacre later, we meet Lieutenant Lieutenant Mira, and then we learn that the orcs have stolen a planetary cannon, which is preventing any ships from landing on the surface, thus preventing the Imperial Guards from transporting supplies and reinforcements that are necessary. So, Captain Titus decides, we gotta get that gun back, or at least do something about it. And then there's this whole conversation between the Space Marines about how the orcs are acting smarter than usual, and that there must be some kind of strategy to all this. Now, the reason I bring up this line is it kind of feels like it was unnecessary considering the fact that we never revisit this again. There is a war boss on the planet who is obviously competent, but they don't really explore this any more than that. But honestly, I'm not playing this game for story, and I don't think anyone really is when it comes down to it. This game's action is what carries it all the way through. It's also at this point that the game starts giving us more weapons to play with, and it introduces 2 weapon slots. While you can't really change out the hand bolter or the upgraded plasma pistol when you get it, or the regular bolter, you can exchange the other 2 weapons that you get. There's multiple weapons to choose from, and I'll kind of go through them as we get to them. But the first guns you're kind of exposed to are a sniper rifle version of the bolter and the Vengeance Launcher. The Vengeance Launcher is just a grenade launcher where you get to detonate the grenades at your whim, but you can only have 3 active grenades at a time. Actually, let's stop right here for a moment, because this is when the game really starts to open up with combat options, and I really haven't taken the time to actually talk about the gameplay. So far, from what you've probably seen in the footage, Space Marine is a very simplistic game as far as how it goes. You shoot orcs, you blow them up with grenades, and you slaughter them with melee attacks. So there is some similarities to Gears of War and how it plays and how it looks, but it's a Space Marine game, so there's no cover system. The Space Marine charges in and he kicks ass. He's got a shield bar kind of like in Halo, and if its shield drains, he starts losing HP. To recover HP, he has to do execution moves on the enemy orcs or whoever else he's fighting in order to regain health. However, this can act like a double-edged sword. The reason I say that is because even while you're healing up, unlike glory kills in Doom, you can still be hit by the enemy. Therefore, if you're in one of the longer animations, because they are random depending on who you're fighting and what weapon yet you have when you're executing them, if it's a longer execution, you can actually be killed in the middle of trying to execute for health. So that makes it dangerous to actually try to do executions for health when you're low on health or don't have a shield ready, which honestly I feel like is kind of counterintuitive to what the game is trying to do. I can't help but feel like the glory kill should either be faster or they should make you immune to damage while doing it, but either way, once you kind of get used to the system, you learn how to best play around it so you don't die so often. The game can be at its worst when you're at the lowest HP point and it's too risky to glory kill, but what you can do is try to hide and recover shield, and then try to pull off some of the weaker orcs behind like a wall or something to quickly execute them, because some of the weaker orcs can be instantly stunned with the F key. However, there is another mechanic that comes into play very early on, which is called Fury. Fury is like this rage mode that your character goes into. When he goes into Fury mode, he basically gets to one-shot most enemies and he can freely execute the bigger enemies. However, he also regains health during this time, so he's pretty hard to kill. I actually found myself, especially in the later levels when it got harder, saving that just to heal up my Space Marine, because it was less risky than trying to run into a group of enemies and getting killed, since a lot of them are going to be stronger as you play. Outside of the actual game mechanics themselves, the most important thing about this game is how it feels. It actually feels very weighty. Every action you do, whether it's sprinting or walking or swinging a chain sword, no matter what it is, it feels heavy and it feels large. You don't really feel like you're super slow or anything as a Space Marine, but you feel like this hulking behemoth as you play the game. The game really does make you feel like what I always imagined Space Marines were like when I was playing Dawn of War before this game came out. And honestly, this game is a power fantasy within a freaking power fantasy. This game is phenomenal. With all that being said, let's kind of get back into the story. So we fight our way all the way to the big gun, slaughtering orcs along the way. Titus decides that capturing the gun is going to be impossible. There's too many orcs, so we're going to blow it up instead. They're going to blow up the gun the most Michael Bay way possible, by putting a bomb on the gun's shell and loading the shell into the gun and letting it destroy itself. Well, can't argue with results. After saving the Imperial Guards and enabling them to use their airships again, the Space Marines make their way to the Titan, as their main objective was always to secure the Titan, and the orcs are currently trying to break in the most orky way possible, with a freaking train that's been turned into a battering ram. God, I love orcs.
What in the Emperor's name did you just say, sir?
First off, guardsmen, do not take the Emperor's name in vain. Second off, I said I love killing orcs.
It's not what I heard.
What do you know? You stand next to a basilisk 18 hours a day. Your ears probably don't even work.
I know that Relic made Dawn of War 3.
Okay, seriously, bring that up again and I'm going to report you. Alright, now stop interrupting me. I got to get back to making this video. So getting back to the orc battering ram / train, we fight our way through the train, defeating orcs and avoiding a gunship that's shooting at us, only to culminate into a fight with the gunship using a massive plasma gun. This fight with the gunship acts as your first real boss fight. Now, it's a very simple one. You really have to dodge the oncoming barrage of fire, but it's not even hard to do, honestly. The thing doesn't aim very well. And you keep shooting with the plasma gun until it falls. Once it falls, it'll crash into the train, causing the train to derail and explode. Classic.
Another happy landing.
This starts part 2 of the campaign. Now part 2 is when the story really starts to pick up. This is where you stumble upon a servo skull, which is scanning dead bodies for someone to speak to. When it scans the Ultramarine Titus, it delivers a message from an Inquisitor named Drogon. Drogon says that orcs are after some kind of experimental power source and he needs immediate assistance preventing this from happening. Lucky for us, the Inquisitor is already at the Manufactorium, so we can make a pit stop on the way to rescue the Inquisitor and get the power supply while we secure the Titan. We also come across a new weapon in the form of the Power Axe. The Power Axe is not too different from a chainsword in my opinion. It's just a little bit slower and does a little bit more damage instead of having the speedier attacks of a chainsword. They're really interchangeable, so whatever you prefer. I personally just like the chain axe because it's more iconic. It is also during this time, as we fight our way to the Inquisitor, that we start to meet new varieties of orcs. So I might as well take the time and talk about the various different orc enemies that you'll face in the game. The ones you're going to fight the most in every encounter are going to be orc boys and Gretchens. These are your common cannon fodder enemies. They're usually easily killed with a couple of bolter shots or a few melee swings. They also send one hit, so they're basically free executions when you need it. Backing them up are usually going to be shooter boys. Now the shooter boys aren't too dangerous when there's only a couple of them, but if there are several of them up and they start shooting at you all at once, they can easily eat through your armor and shields. In all honesty, when it comes to the orcs, there's only 2 orcs that are exceptionally dangerous. It's not the knobs or the choppa knobs as the game would like you to believe. It's the rocket boys and combi rocket boys. You see, once these guys show up, you can forget about every other orc on the screen because these guys gotta die fast. For most of the game, until you get your iron halo, which will increase your shields, the rocket launchers that the orcs have will easily kill you in a couple of hits, and when there's multiple of them, you're going to get hit multiple times, and these guys are super accurate with them. You can dodge them after they've been shot, but when you got a bunch of orcs on top of you, it can be sometimes hard to see what the hell's happening. Furthermore, the rocket knobs even have machine guns attached to their rocket launcher, and those machine guns actually eat through your armor and shields really easily as well. And they usually spawn multiple machine gun rocket knobs at the same time, and they will hit you from even far away, and they do not miss. They can hardly be avoided because they will accurately hit you every time. The best way to deal with them is to kind of LOS them behind a wall and kind of snipe them from a range before they have time to use their machine gun, as they'll normally try to use their rockets first, which are a little bit easier to actually avoid compared to the machine gun. So once you get further into the game, you're probably going to spend most of your time shooting these guys first before you actually fight any of the other orcs, just because they are the most dangerous. I will also say this, the orcs do have 2 powerful melee enemies. One is going to be the knob and the other one's the chopper slugger knob. Both of them are not really a threat though. The main reason being is that if you fight them in melee and you're not surrounded, you can keep them continuously stun locked by just hitting the melee attack twice and then hitting F, and it'll be an infinite stun lock loop where they can't attack until they eventually die. Or the better way is to just kite them, as they're slower than you are and you can just keep shooting them as you kite away. Honestly, the range units are the most threatening units in the entire game because if they can hit you consistently, then they will kill you pretty easily. There is also the shielded orcs, but they're easy to kill despite how tanky they look like they can be. You can either use your plasma pistol to set up a bomb that will cause them to lose their shield, or you can use something like a melta gun and just blast them and they'll still die. There is one orc I'll say is a bit dangerous in melee, and that's the Scar Boy, but that's only dangerous if they surround you, as they can go into a rage when they're low on health and they'll just attack and attack so fast, faster than you usually can, and they can overwhelm you easily. But again, they're easy to kill with range attacks and kite, so it's not really that big of a deal. Finally, the last enemy that the orcs like to use are the bomb squids, and I almost honestly forgot about them because they're not really a threat whatsoever. They try to run at you and explode, but they're easy to avoid, and honestly, you'll always hear them. Whenever they're around, they're really loud, and you can just kind of shoot them, and they'll act as like a free grenade and blow up the orcs around them. So, moving on to the story, you fight your way through some more orcs, of course, and you arrive at the facility where the Titan's house. And let me tell you, you ride up this elevator during this one scene, and then you come upon the Titan, and this thing is literally just a skyscraper with guns all over it. It's freaking badass, man. I really wish we got some cool shots or cinematic of the Titan doing something, but it just does one little thing in the story and that's it. It doesn't really get to be the war machine that it deserves to be. It's also at this time we come up on Inquisitor Drogon. Meeting with Inquisitor Drogon is a bit off. You could tell that something's not quite right with him, as he almost seems like he wasn't expecting to see anyone, even though he had sent out a distress call. And when Captain Titus brings up the power source, the guy almost seems confused, like, oh, how do you know about that? Like he didn't send that out. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but Captain Titus does notice one thing. He mentions how the Inquisitor has a horrible wound on him, and that maybe we should get that looked at, but the Inquisitor just says, oh, I'm a psyker, it's fine, I can control it. But looking at the wound, it looks old. It doesn't look fresh, and that should be a telltale sign that something's not right with him. Furthermore, and it could just be the graphics of the game, but the wound almost looks really deep, like there's teared muscles and stuff, and you would think that someone would not really be alive after that. Oh well, being Ultramarines means you don't really need to think too much about things, because as they say, thinking too much can be heresy. There is no finer example than Leandros when it comes to not overthinking things too much. His logic is sound. You no follow book? You heretic. Me tell Inquisitor on you. Alright, well I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's get back to the story at hand. This is also where we have our encounter with War Boss Grimskull, who is tired of our shit because he wants to get his loot and we're getting in his way. And honestly, on some level, I can respect that. He just wants to get in there and get his loot, and then some blue Power Ranger keeps getting his freaking way. I understand, I'd be frustrated too. It's also at this time that we meet the mini boss, Weird Boy, and let me tell you, he's not a threat at all. He can be easily killed very quickly. I mean, he can try to be annoying where he'll try to teleport around and shoot lasers at you and all this other stuff, but honestly, if you just catch him once or twice, you can easily kill him with a couple of headshots. We make our way into the experimental chamber room, and apparently Titus has to go by himself, and he tells his other guys to hang back and defend the place so he can have a cool little mini boss fight in this room. Here, War Boss Grimskull shows back up, and more importantly though, the actual boss fight is going to be with the orcs that are charging in, as well as the weird boy that appears with him. Now this fight can be relatively easy or hard, depends on how you make of it and how well you prepared. If you brought in some decent hard hitting guns and you maybe have some fury ready, you should be able to get through this fight no problem. They're going to send waves of orcs at you, and some of them are going to be like knobs, and this is about the only time any knobs are going to be a threat to you because the room is very enclosed and it's harder to avoid their strikes. But if you have fury, it should trivialize the fight for you and make it easy for you to get through it and kill the knobs quickly. If not, I would suggest using like a stalker bolter and just kind of headshotting them a bunch of times and they should go down relatively easily. That or the vengeance launcher. About 4 grenades is all you need to stun a knob. You'll also have to deal with a weird boy, but if you have a stalker bolter, it should also be very easily. You just need a few clean headshots. At some point the chamber will just open up and all you got to do is run up and interact with it, and it'll trigger the cutscene and move you to the next chapter. This will trigger a cutscene where the orc boss tries to stop you by destroying the machine that's supposed to handle the energy source, which forces Titus to grab the energy source to try to contain it. This ends up causing a huge explosion which actually knocks Titus out. He does eventually wake up and no orcs are to be found. He does put the artifact in a container and contacts his squad mates who believed him to be dead because the Inquisitor insisted he had to have died. Now there's a whole sequence where you fight through a bunch of tunnels and you do get your hands on a melt-a-gun, which is extremely powerful, especially in close range. It'll one-tap most orcs, and even the stronger orcs can be killed in a couple taps. It does, however, have limited ammo, but when used right, you should be able to clear hordes of orcs easily. It's honestly one of the best guns in the game, just from a feeling standpoint as well, because whenever you blast a bunch of orcs with it, sometimes it'll disintegrate them all, and it'll leave just like a little bit of flames on the ground, and it just feels so awesome and cinematic. After Titus meets up with his squad mates and they rendezvous with Inquisitor Drogon again, Titus decides that the Inquisitor needs to leave with the rest of his squad mates because the orcs are following them for the power source, and the Inquisitor seems to be slowing them down due to him being wounded, which honestly I believe the Inquisitor was playing up because he tried to convince Titus to give up the power source, but Titus told him no, he needs the orcs to follow him and create a distraction, which then leads to probably one of the most badass sequences in this entire game. Now, I mentioned earlier that this game can be a power fantasy within a power fantasy, but this just takes it to that level. You see, being a Space Marine is already badass. Being a Space Marine that just kicks and crushes a bunch of big-ass orcs' skulls like they're nothing more than Play-Doh in his hands is awesome. But then, to give that freaking Space Marine a giant, shocking force hammer alongside a jetpack and watch him turn orcs into mashed potatoes within a few seconds. Everyone at some point should play through this sequence. Hell, they don't even need to know what Warhammer is. If they play through this one level, they'll know what a power fantasy really is. They will know what a space marine is. After battling your way through a bunch of orcs with your Thunderhammer, actually, correction, not battling, more like massacring and exterminating a bunch of orcs on your way, you can meet up with the rest of your squad at a Valkyrie, and this next sequence that happens is actually pretty cool to me. It kind of breaks up the gameplay a little bit, but I enjoy that. You're flying on a Valkyrie and shooting at orc storm boys who are flying up on their little jetpacks trying to destroy the Valkyries around you and trying to shoot you down, and it's pretty fun just taking them out and having this big action set piece as all these freaking orc boys are flying around shooting at us, and there's a bunch of Valkyries. After this set piece, which of course ends with, once again, another happy landing.
Another happy landing.
I swear, all these ships in this game are being flown by Anakin Skywalker. They just do not know how to land. They can only crash. Now, this next part in the game is actually very slow, and I don't enjoy it at all. It's the one time the pace is completely destroyed. And that's because you are basically running through a facility shooting at turrets on the wall, which are easy to predict where they are, and you can just kind of one-shot them with the new last cannon that they give you. So I'm not going to waste any time. I'm just going to skip right to the part to where we actually get to the Psychic Scourge, which is the weapon that's supposedly going to fire off and destroy all the orcs. Yeah, so basically as we're going through the facility, the Inquisitor explains that the weapon that's here can kill all the orcs somehow and save us all, or it might destroy the planet. Who knows? But hey, Captain Titus is ready to take that chance, because who's thinking these things through anyways? Now, let's just talk about this for a minute. The Inquisitor is promising some kind of Deus Ex Machina that he doesn't explain to anyone at all, that's supposedly going to kill all the orcs, but no one else. It doesn't really make any sense. But, of course, the Ultramarines are going to go with it. It is also explained that the power source is warp energy. That's how it's powered, which, to the gas of all the Marines, they're like, oh no, that's not good, that's chaos. Which promptly makes Leandros completely suspicious of his captain because, hey, if he can touch the warp, according to the book, right, the Codex Astartes, he must be corrupted somehow by the chaos energies. You know, despite the fact that Titus has done nothing but been an honorable soldier this entire time and shown no signs that he's actually corrupted by any warp energy. But remember, thinking is heresy. Actually, don't remember that. It might make you think too hard. So what happens when they fire this Psychic Scourge? Does it, of course, destroy the orcs? Or does the warp energy source create a warp storm? I'll let you take a guess. If you guessed it creates a warp storm and summons a Chaos Lord, you'd be right. So it turns out Drogon is actually an agent of chaos, and he's not the Inquisitor. You never trust the man with a Skrillex haircut. At this time the orcs show up, which proves that the Psychic Scourge didn't do anything to harm the orcs. Furthermore, Boss Grimskull is here and he's just laughing his ass off because he ain't the stupidest one in the room. The orcs are quickly overwhelmed though as a portal opens up with a bunch of bloodletterers. And of course, a Chaos Lord also walks out. The Bloodletterers all charge the orc boss, Grimskull, and he's just laughing his ass off, having the greatest time of his life as he fights these Bloodletterers and they knock him off the platform. I'm telling you, Grimskull is such a mood. Space Marines charge the Chaos Lord and they just kind of get stunned by his warp magic. They don't really stand a chance against him, but Titus does fare the best because he is resistant to warp energy, and the Chaos Lord is actually quite impressed by this. Which then causes Nimirov, which is the name of the Chaos Lord, to start monologuing the entire time and turn his back, so Titus gets the opportunity to try to get the power source from him.
Thanks to these brave Space Marines, we have broken through to this reality.
Nimirov notices what Titus has done and turns around and starts using his warp magic more on him, and he's just kind of goading on Titus, trying to poison his mind and get into his head. All the while he continues to monologue, and he doesn't see that Grimskull has climbed back up out of the shaft and is behind him. Warboss Grimskull proceeds to have the most badass moment in the entire game.
I ain't so easy to kill.
Then Grimskull proceeds to get into a wrestling match with the Chaos Lord.
Watch out, watch out, watch out!
And then they proceed to fall off the same shaft that Grimskull had climbed back out of. I've got to be honest with you, this game has done less for me story-wise for the Space Marines and even the Chaos. It's really just made me really appreciate the orcs and how badass they are and how they're not really bothered by anything. You see, when life gives orcs lemons, they just laugh and fight the lemons.
Sir, what are you saying? That's heresy.
I thought you went to work.
I did. I forgot me lasgun at home. Were you expecting company?
Nope, I don't know who that is.
This is the Inquisition. Open up.
Grok shit.
We are investigating reports of heresy.
You really did report me, didn't you?
I did not report you. I don't know why she's here.
Silence! Java, what are you doing here?
I'm just making a video about how our boys in blue saved us from Xenos and heretic filth about 13 years ago.
Ah, yes. You must be talking about Relic Entertainment / Warhammer 40k video game Space Marine.
Don't you mean second to last, me lord?
What was that?
But you're forgetting about Dawn of War 3, me lord.
Guardsmen, no such thing exists. I told you already.
Look, I get you don't like Dawn of War 3, but it exists, and it's not so bad once you play a little bit of it. You'll like it.
Seems we found the heretic. Per the Lex Imperialis, anyone who speaks about which that shall not be named will be excommunicata traitorous.
As I stated in my historically accurate video, Space Marine is the last game in the Warhammer 40k franchise by Relic Entertainment.
Good. Praise the Emperor and be sure to clean this mess up.
Yes, as you wish, Lord Inquisitor. Well, that was quite an event, to say the least. Let's get this show on the road, because I gotta do a deep cleaning in my house after this. Well, now that we've caused the Chaos Invasion and the orcs are still running amok, we gotta try to fix this mess as quick as possible. Titus knows that the Spire is currently the source of the warp storm, so in order to stop it, he's going to use the power source again, but this time to supercharge the Titan's weapons to try to blow the Spire out, because otherwise the warp storm will continue to expand, allowing more Chaos forces to appear. Now we have a whole new set of enemies to fight. Chaos Space Marines, Evil Guardsmen, and Bloodletterers. Chaos forces can be quite challenging, but to be honest with you, it's mostly going to be regulated to the Evil Imperial Guards and the Chaos Space Marines. Bloodletterers are just not a real threat to me at all at this point in the game, especially with the weapons I got. In fact, let's talk about a very specific weapon at this point. The Las Cannon. You see, the Las Cannon is incredibly overpowered in this game. This gun can one-shot most enemies with one headshot, and even Chaos Space Marines can be done in 2 shots. While the las gun does have limited ammo, it doesn't really matter because you just need to use it on the big enemies, because it'd be a waste to use it on any small enemy that you can just mop up easily with a bolter round or 2. And also at this point you would have gotten the Kraken upgrade for the bolter gun, so it's going to do massive damage on its own. Most fights in this late stage of the game will come down to you knocking out the big enemies with your las cannon, and then just switching over to a bolter to mop up the cannon fodder. Honestly, the worst part about Chaos, interestingly enough, is going to be the fact that the guardsmen that they summon have very rapid firing las cannons, plus they throw grenades like crazy. And so they can easily overwhelm you while you're trying to deal with a Chaos Space Marine. So the next 2 missions are basically you setting up a defense perimeter to help the Imperial Guard withstand the Chaos and Orc assault, and dealing with the fact that you need to get to the Titan and get it up and running. The best part about these missions is the other Chaos, no pun intended, when it comes to these missions. The Orcs and Chaos forces are an absolutely all-out war against each other, and you can literally walk into fights where they're both going at it hardcore, and it's pretty cool to see. It basically becomes Warhammer Total War. However, that doesn't really last long, because in the next sequence you end up fighting Grim Skull in a boss fight. This is the most interesting boss fight in the entire game, but honestly, once you've done it so many times, Grim Skull becomes pretty easy. In fact, I did so much damage to him sometimes it was glitching him out and causing him not to enter his other phases, and then he would just constantly throw blinding grenades on the ground and cause us to get blinded, which was supposed to lead him to another phase, but he would just kind of stand there. Honestly, this fight could have gone a lot faster if I had brought the las cannon, but I tried out the plasma gun because I had just acquired it, and it wasn't really worth. I will say the plasma gun was a bit underwhelming in this game, just because at this time you've already gotten a lot more guns that do everything better, so you don't really need the plasma gun. Don't get me wrong, the plasma gun isn't bad or anything, it's just that it's kind of an all-rounder weapon, and while that's fine, the bolter already fulfills that spot, so it's not really necessary to carry around, especially when the las cannon does so much damage, and then the melta gun will wipe out groups of enemies that are approaching you. There really isn't a reason to bring the plasma gun over another gun. The only other gun that I would say is very useful around this time is the Storm Bolter, just because you can wipe out groups of Bloodletterers very easily. But honestly, the Melta Gun kind of does what the Storm Bolter can do even better, because of the simple fact that the Storm Bolter isn't great against all the Chaos Space Marines you're going to fight because of their heavy armor, and even though you might be able to kill a bunch of the Evil Guardsmen that come out with it, the only issue with that is you've got to be kind of close for any decent accuracy, and at that point you might as well just use the Melta Gun. Anyways, after we defeat the Orc boss and we get a badass one-liner from Captain Titus here, we end up moving on to the next phase, which is actually using the Titan to fire the railgun into the Spire. But first, we gotta fight our way through some chaos, and the orcs aren't around to help us distract them because the orc boss is now dead, and so they're all running away. But that's okay, we got our trusty las cannon. Chaos Sorcerer shows up, las cannon. Chaos Champion shows up, las cannon. If you aren't winning fights at this time, you just aren't using the last cannon enough. We finally get over to the Titan, which is now operational. We get up on top of it, we load in the power source, and we blast the goddamn ever-living hell out of that spire and end this warp storm. Sadly, and I feel like this is the worst part about all this, the Titan is now overloaded due to the power source, so we don't get to see the Titan in action really. It feels like such a missed opportunity, but I'm sure there was like a budget constraint or something, honestly, because THQ was struggling around this time, and I don't think Relic was getting the money they needed anyhow. Honestly, it's kind of a miracle we got this game before THQ shut down. So the warp storm is ended, and the orcs are no longer a threat. So after meeting up with his squad, Titus decides that, hey, we need to get this artifact off this planet and get it into safer hands. Which, let me say, Titus is a smart guy. He says it right here. He says, no, we're not going to hand this thing back off to the Inquisition. They screwed that up already. We're going to take this over to our chapter master. Sardonis just suggests that we put a bolt around into it. I want you to remember this, by the way. Titus gives the power source to Sardonis and tells Sardonis he's going to stay behind and thin out the Chaos ranks, like a badass. It's at this point they're ambushed by Chaos Space Marines, and he tells Sardonis to get out of there and to focus on getting to the landing pad. They got to get this power source out. I'm sure you've already figured this out, but if you haven't already, the game is going to have Sardonis get backstabbed by the Chaos Lord. And I mean that literally, not figuratively. I think the funny thing is Sardonis just couldn't protect himself because he was too busy doing a kill animation, which, remember what I told you, you can still be killed while doing these things. Why didn't you learn the lesson I tried to teach you, Sardonis? Why couldn't it have been Leandros? This also, of course, leads to Nemeroff getting the power source, and he reveals that he got the power source because he wants to use it as an offering to the Chaos Gods to transform himself into a demon prince. I kind of find this amusing in the sense that Nemeroff didn't really care that his invasion failed. Nemeroff only wanted to become a demon prince, and anything else that happened be damned. At least he has his priorities straight. So at this point, Titus is pissed. His best friend was just killed. He's going to kill every single Chaos Space Marine, demon, or anything else that gets in his way to get his revenge. This is Titus's Daisy moment. As Titus rips and tears across the planet, he ends up encountering the fact that other Space Marine reinforcements have arrived. The Blood Ravens, a nice nod to the Dawn of War franchise, as well as more Ultramarines, and you get this entire awesome sequence where you're fighting across the bridge, fighting an army of Chaos Space Marines and demons alongside your battle brothers, and it's just freaking amazing. I would say this is the best level in the entire game outside of the level where you get your Force Hammer and Jetpack and go on a murdering spree against the orcs. Speaking of which, right after this whole sequence, we actually get a nerd sequence where we're running around with a Thunder Hammer and a Jetpack, but this time we're flying up on rooftops and fighting Chaos, which for the stronger Chaos enemies and when you're getting ganged up on by a bunch of demons, just jump up and use your hammer slam again. Just do it repeatedly and you'll keep them stun locked forever. Also keep in mind that this game gave me invisible walls at every point of it until this time. At this time, you can now fall off to your death. The entire time playing this game, it's been so linear that everything has a wall. The walls have invisible walls in front of them. I'm not kidding. There's so many of them, and so I was kind of caught off guard when I could just fall down to my death. As we reach the top, we reach the final battle of this game. The epic boss battle against the Chaos Lord Nemeroff, who is currently transforming into a demon prince. How could this possibly go? How could they make this boss fight? How awesome is it going to be? Alright, the guy's monologuing. He's got a shield around him. I can't shoot him. Alright, I gotta kill a few waves of enemies, and then we can fight. Alright? Okay, maybe just a few more waves of enemies. Any moment now, he'll lower his shield, pull out his weapon, and we're gonna have the biggest fight of all time. Oh wait, there's a cutscene now. Alright, this must be where the fight starts.
Killing my servants matters little. I am unassailable. The gods of chaos protect me with the very energies of creation.
You forget, Nemeroff. I am no stranger to the touch of the warp.
And now we're both falling. Well, maybe we'll fight on the ground once we land. Nope. That's it. That's the boss fight. The boss fight ends, and then Titus crushes the power source with his bare hands. Where just 30 minutes ago, his best friend was like, hey, maybe we should just blow it up and shoot it with our guns, and maybe that'll be fine. And he's like, no, we can't do that. It's too dangerous. And then he proceeds to do it anyways. Can you imagine if it just reopened the warp storm and all the chaos came right back in? And maybe, just maybe, Nemiroff was resurrected by the chaos gods as some kind of joke, and Nemiroff just came right back out. And then we could have had our boss fight. Oh well, I guess this is the end. Well, here's the thing, no happy endings, it's Warhammer. The game ends with Leandros telling the Inquisition and the Black Templars that Titus must be a traitor. Does Leandros not remember the entire conversation that they had, what, maybe a few hours ago at most, about how the Inquisition can't be trusted after what they did with the power source previously? And Titus, in his defense, literally said, I killed the freaking demons, I killed the orcs, what else do you want from me to prove my loyalty? And the Inquisition's like, if you don't come with us, we're gonna kill everyone on this planet. And Titus just tells Leandros he's a freaking disappointment and a failure, and decides, hey, I have no choice but to protect people, so I have to go with the Inquisition. And that's Warhammer Space Marine 40k, the campaign. I'm very curious on how Space Marine 2 is going to pick up the story, especially given that Titus was arrested by the Inquisition on suspicion of heresy. But all in all, even though I give the story a little bit of flack, I really liked the game and I did enjoy the story for what it was. It's just, sometimes when you think about it, especially in hindsight, some of it's just kind of hilarious. Now, the last thing I was going to cover was the multiplayer modes, but honestly, they're not very active. The only one that I could find games for was the Exterminatus mode, which is basically a mode where you fight waves of enemies, and then every 5th wave you go to another area until you get to the 20th wave. I had a few games of that, and that was actually really fun. I actually did really like playing it too, because you could play as Chaos Space Marines, and I get this really sick ass Death Guard armor. But honestly, the problem I have with this mode is that a lot of people I played with, if any time their connection at all kind of dropped even a little bit, it caused our entire game to freeze or things to lag. And so there was constantly issues with the game lagging, which would cause people to die or other things to happen. So it wasn't really fun. You can play it by yourself, but it's not balanced for solo play, and I really don't enjoy playing it without playing with other players anyhow. There are 3 classes you can choose from. You can customize them and customize your Space Marine / Chaos Space Marine, which is fun, but again, the multiplayer is pretty much dead, and so you're pretty much stuck to this Exterminatus game. With all that being said, if Space Marine 2 can deliver on what this game's campaign did, I think it'll be completely fine. I mean, it should be a lot of fun slaughtering a bunch of bugs instead of orcs, and I'm looking forward to what they maybe do with Captain Titus and everything. With all that being said, that was my retrospective on Space Marine. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I now gotta go find a new roommate, so you have a good rest of your day.